talk to us a little bit about ESA. I guess the time period, I think, was sort of late 1800s.
Yeah, it was founded in 1872 by two men, one of whom had a stationery company, and this is the ancestor of the third managing director, who was James Leonard's boss, and his allies. Really, this is the story of those two men.
Right.
And they expanded in the 1880s. They opened the factory here for the first time, and they were the leading company for school supplies, from pencils to room dividers.
From the start?
Well, not from the start, but by 1880,
right? Okay.
They'd become the leaders, and in a sense, they had a very good war, second war. Because they made aircraft handling equipment, which was kind of metal trolleys to carry bits of aircraft around when they were being repaired or being serviced and the rest of it. And James Leonard was in charge of that, factory number 2.
Right.
And they also made 1,000 mosquito wings.
Right.
Now, the de Havilland Mosquito was, as experts in aircraft, of which I'm not one, reckon it was by far the best British plane, much better than the Spitfire, and pilots absolutely adored it. And it was a brilliant design by Geoffrey de Havilland, who had also designed a brilliant lightweight bomber in the First War. And when the Second War came, he thought, I need to do something similar. So he came up with this brilliant idea of a wooden fighter bomber, but it was a fighter originally. Took it to the the Air Ministry, and they said, you're getting on a bit really, aren't you? So from that welcome, he decided to make the prototype himself.
Okay.
And the Air Ministry guys came along and insisted they bring a Spitfire. And the Spitfire couldn't keep up.
Right.
And so they outsourced the work. So the wings, for example, were perfect for a woodworking factory, which is what ESA was. And they made over 1,000 wing systems, because it was one piece, the wing. But where James Leonard got quite a lot of his inspiration from, for both these chairs, was that the Mosquito was made, the fuselage of the Mosquito was made in 2 halves, cut down the middle, separated out so they could be fitted out. It was mainly women doing the work, all the electrics, all the mechanicals, all fitted in together. And there were just metal rods holding them in relation to each other. And then they would close that to make the fuselage.
Yeah.
So when James Leonard came along, what you see in both these chairs, which is very unusual at the time, unique at the time, is that the whole side of that chair there, and even this chair here, is one piece. It's a one-piece casting, joined by, you can just about see at the back of that one, simple hollow tubing. So it was a very unusual design because, apart from the aluminium side, nobody before had made furniture castings so big. So the chair was, just two sides, and you can see in one of the cabinets, you can see one of the side castings that from the chair. And this one, the X201, is the one that was mentioned earlier by our learned friend. There were over 1 million of these made. Now, that's something easy to throw away as a figure, but nobody knows about it apart from you in this room. Because the only people who knew were those in the factory. I met James Leonard's assistant in 2005. He's sadly died. But he was a huge fan, and he gave me the only other example of the catalogue, which you see copies of on the wall in there when you finish. The only other example is in the Museum of Modern Art of that catalogue. So it was a very rare...
In New York?
In New York, yeah. It was a very rare thing which he very kindly gave me, and it started me wondering... the odd thing is I remember almost every word he told me in 2005. Isn't that a bit weird, really? But anyway... so I learned an awful lot about James Leonard and about the work that he did. And what you have to remember when you think these are made from aluminium... And what happened in 1944 is the government realised there would be no wood and no steel after the war. But they had lots of scrap aluminium, partly from shooting Jerry down, but also you were able to buy it in bricks.
Yeah.
And so Johnny Appleton, who was the managing director, the third generation managing director, who was an extraordinary character. I'll give you a little bit of background. He devised a motor car, the Appleton Special racing car, which was the leading private steer motor car and driver during the interwar period. And he held a lap record at Brooklands on the banked circuit. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
Pretty scary. So you can tell he was a bit of a risk taker. He wasn't a standard ESA type of person at all. He was a very bright guy and a risk taker. And he got on very well with James Leonard. Now, James Leonard...
were they close in age?
They were close in age. Yeah, I mean, I think Leonard was about 4 years older, actually, in fact. But Leonard started at the factory in 1919, age 15. And his parents, his father was a JP in Old Stevenage. This is an old Stevenage story, really. His father wanted, both his parents wanted him to be an architect. And so they had him... Whilst he started working at the factory, he was also apprenticed to an architect called Barry Parker, who I'd never heard of. But Barry Parker was one of the two architects that designed Letchworth Garden City, the first garden city in the world.
Yeah.
And so James Leonard was put under him as an apprentice. And although Barry Parker wasn't quite in the first rank of arts and crafts architects, he was a very good architect, passionate about the arts and crafts qualities and themes and morality, as it were. Mm. And so he was almost the perfect person for Jim Leonard to be taught by, whilst he was grinding every day out in the rather unrewarding context of a mass production factory. Mm. But in 1944 he got his chance, because he and Johnny Appleton realised there was an opportunity here. The furniture industry in Britain was remarkably conservative, you'll be surprised to hear. And only ESA, only Johnny Appleton really took it on. And the way he took it on was very dramatic, because he went over to the States, and in California he found the most advanced machinery, the kind of stuff that Britain needed but nobody had the money to buy. Mm-hmm. And this machinery was so advanced it had just been patented in 1945. And he bought this machinery, brought it over here, and installed in the woodworking factory a foundry. And the molten aluminium was at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit and 4,000 pounds per square inch pressure into these dies. And they could make, as was mentioned, 7 chairs a minute. In art history, when people talk about the aluminium furniture post-war, they remember a great designer called Ernest Race. And he's celebrated in art history. There's a very good article in the Design History Journal about aluminium furniture. And it ends by saying how remarkable that Ernest Race was able to make 250,000 of those chairs. Nobody knew or cared to leave London, get off their asses and come up here and find that the factory had made over 1 million. Mm. The best-selling British chair in history at the time. Mm. And so art history's done a great job. It's ignored everything important in favour of sitting not on a James Leonard chair in London. Mm. Now this was the teacher's chair. This is a model. This was made by University of Westminster Architecture Department as a project. It's a 3D drawings, and the 3D drawing which we've still got work to do on. Because when you do something like this, although we have these chairs, we didn't have one of these, and so there's a lot of guesswork, because it's quite a different, you can see that very dramatic leg-arm combination. It's quite a different set of problems to the standard chair, and as far as we know there are only 2 of these made, and there's a story in that why that happened, which I'll come back to about 10 o'clock.
So just to clarify, This is our million seller.
Yes, that's a million seller.
You and I are sitting on a smaller.
We are. We've shrunken. Our assets have shrunken.
A small kindergarten version. But the chair on the right,
Yes.
as I understand it, you saw for the first time in the catalogue
Yes.
that Leonard's assistant gifted to you.
Correct.
The only other known copy in the Museum of Modern Art in New York.
Yes, officer.
And from how many photos exist of this? So from 3 photos
In the catalogue.
it's been redrawn
Yeah.
and 3D scanned
Yes.
to make
Yeah. And
the scale model,
yeah,
which is in the
yeah.
other room.
And the idea is to make a full-scale one
Yeah.
with a wonderful English foundry that make cylinder heads and carburetors for pre-war
Racing cars.
Bugattis and for Formula One cars. So we're talking about Formula One standard production,
Yeah.
which we hope to use, and we're going around with a collection box later on to make the X202.
So was it when you said it's implied that only 2 existed? Was that from Leonard's assistant saying we made 2 prototypes?
That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked me that question because James Leonard's assistant began with him in 1951.
Okay.
This was first made as a prototype in October 1947,
Yeah.
and James Leonard's assistant had never seen one.
Oh. Okay.
Now, why was that? And the reason I think is that this was James Leonard's masterpiece, I think, his best design. And for reasons that I will go into about maybe 11 o'clock, in fact, they didn't enter into mass production with it. And there were a whole bunch of reasons why that. I think maybe the cost was higher, there were certain problems to be solved, engineering problems. But I think this is a candidate for Chair of the Century. And Chair of the Century was awarded in 1999 by Time magazine to design by the American husband and wife, Ray and
Charles,
thank you very much. Eames for called the LCW, which was a bent ply chair.
Yeah.
Now, bent ply to me is old hat. You know, it went back to the 1860s, and even the modernist ones went back to 1931, really, to that period. But nobody was doing this kind of production, this kind of manufacturing that ESA and Leonard and Johnny Appleton were doing. And I think it's so distinguished in so many ways and so modern, and yet he had no followers. And the reason he had no followers, as our learned friend mentioned before, the cost of setup was beyond any company in British furniture industry, even if they had competent management and imagination, which they didn't.
Mm. So when Appleton went to America and bought into the technology, was ESA a massively rich company, or was it?
They'd done.
We've spoken about him before.
Yes, they had a good war.
Okay.
I mean, they were able to turn to making things that Britain needed for the war effort.
Yeah.
And many companies were not able to do that. And I mean, they had a big factory. They had up to 1,000 employees, and they turned out large amounts of stuff which they got paid for. And so they were one of very few, excuse me, possibly almost the only company that had the money that they could take a chance. And it was a brilliant gamble by Johnny Appleton. And the reason it was such a brilliant gamble was, although there was a lot of money involved, the only sector in which you could be sure of selling large numbers was the education sector. If you were trying to sell through Heels or Harrods or wherever, you know,
it's very limited.
you could sell maybe 10, maybe 100, maybe 1,000, but not the kind of numbers that they needed to make this work and succeeded magnificently. So that the catalogue came out in February of March 1948, and by a year later, ESA had a monopoly in the education furniture market, much to the chagrin of the whole of the rest of the furniture industry, who went to Parliament and asked Parliament to change the rules of purchasing for educational furniture because they couldn't compete. So within a year, they'd, as it were, wiped the slate. You know, everybody was struggling and couldn't compete. They hadn't made the investment that Appleton had made. And these chairs carried on being made till the 70s and even the 80s. The factory closed in 1987, having been asset stripped by the very lovely, what was his name? Robert Maxwell. Yeah, Robert Maxwell. And demolished the factory and sold it for housing. Apparently, one of the factory buildings, the whole roof area was full of James Leonard prototypes, and they were skipped.
Is that true, or is that just a fantasy?
That's what his assistant told me.
Okay.
But it's a good fantasy. You know, fantasies are better, aren't they? Really?
Yeah. And you told me about a trip that. Well, two things that stuck in my head were the biggest doors in the world, which I think you should tell the story of that.
Oh, let me do that, and you can hold on to the second one.
Okay.
So, 1946, September the 10th, 1946, ESA applied to patent the 6 designs that you see in the next door. And in the same year, James Leonard designed the mechanisms for the biggest door in the world, which was 1,000 feet long, for Filton Aerodrome. So it's a hangar door which could open and close in 2 minutes in 1946.
It just sounds just unbelievable.
Well, he was a self-taught engineer as well. He was a bright guy. I mean, Johnny Appleton was very bright, but he was a qualified engineer. James Leonard was self-taught, really, and just had a knack, I think, for... I mean, designing the mechanisms for something like that so that it opened smoothly and fast forever was really a hell of an achievement. In fact, there was a company, somebody that used to work in the factory, bought out the Asavian name in order to have James Leonard's designs. And the guy that bought that company out is now in his late 80s or maybe 90. Was a huge admirer. He'd never met James Leonard, but he was a huge admirer of the qualities of the design that he'd managed to create for that kind of scale of doors, you know, which is a hell of a big... They were 45 feet high, as well as 1,000 feet long. So the second point.
It's not really a point, it was more something that stuck in my head about James Leonard and Johnny Appleton in a sports car. Not in Johnny Appleton's racing car,
no.
But in
Yes, it wasn't actually a sport, it was Johnny Appleton's Bentley.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Now this is a story again told me by his assistant, which was as soon as the roads are open after the war, Appleton drove James Leonard to Scandinavia to catch up with the latest designs, because Leonard was a huge fan of Alvar Aalto, and also of Scandinavian design in general, which brings me back to these 2 chairs, because what I discovered, and again nobody else knows this, so keep it secret, please, keep it secret, is that Leonard was inspired by a Swedish modernist furniture designer called Axel Larsson, who's not very well known. But you know those books like 100 Chairs and all that? Yeah. Well, in one of those series, not the Taschen ones, but one after, I came across this chair and I thought, because what was interesting about it, when our friend at the University of Westminster made this 3D drawing, he said, the problem with these 2, he said, there's not one straight line in either design. Axel Larsson's 1939 armchair had not one straight line in it, and it was wood, and it was the first one that I saw, and it was an organic inspiration. So there are no straight lines in nature. Those of us that are familiar with trees know that they get thinner, whether it's the base or the branches. There are no straight lines, there are no regular sections in nature. These 2 have no straight lines in them. The first time this has ever been done in mass production, ever done in steel. And even Larson only did 1 chair like that. So Leonard invented really what I call modernism 3. If we think modernism 1 was Corbusier and Breuer, the steel-framed desks and chairs, the tubular ones, chromed often. Then the second phase was 1931 with Alvar Aalto's amazing bent ply chair. And then 1939, the end of that period, Axel Larsen comes up with this no straight lines organic version. And James Leonard was inspired by that. And again, nobody knows about it. So it will be in the book. But the fact that he produced the biggest selling chair in British history, but also created a new element for, as it were, for design history with Modernism 3, and again nobody has discovered it, is amazing, and in our niche is quite exciting.
Indeed. Can you tell me a little bit about the naming? So I love this idea of Project X.
Yes, yeah.
And when you first wrote to me about it, I thought, well, that's just got to be Peter's.
Certainly not. No, actually, Project X. Project X is in the board minutes, and they called it that in the factory. And I love it because it's so redolent of the period. This is 1944, 45, 46, and it sounds like a rocket in Dan Dare, really, which is later. Dan Dare was copying. And all the chairs that you see in there, there are 6 pieces. There are 2 chairs, 2 desks, and 2 tables, and they all begin X. And so they followed that through. And I think, in a way, the inspiration for it was the fact that the whole process and the materials were all new, and nobody in the whole of Britain had done that or did that, and nobody even followed it up. And yet, it's an untold story.
It feels like the Project X thing is almost Appleton and Leonard, our private thing that they managed to do on the side, and then it became the bestseller.
There is a lovely story about that, because Appleton and Leonard were both extraordinary. Appleton was extremely bright, very risk-oriented, completely uniquely in ESA, which is known as a staid factory. And this was the one moment in their whole history that, they went AWOL. And it was by far the most successful, really, because otherwise they were very competent, very well organised. They were known to, before Appleton arrived and was a breath of fresh air, it was known as the Extreme Slavery Association by their workers. Because, it's very rigid and the rest of it. And so when when Appleton came in, it turned over a new leaf. And this was the...
You told me about the sports centre.
Yes, because often we find from the 30s premonitions of the move, the spirit of the National Health Service and the the post-war move to welfare state, and because the Extreme Slavery Association made no allowances really for their workers. What Appleton did, and Mrs. Appleton, Hilda Appleton, was very much behind this. She pushed for a sports centre.
Was that Johnny's wife?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Leonard designed it. Leonard designed the sports centre, and it was opened in 1938. It had. There are some pictures which are in there, or there will be tomorrow if they're not in there today. Which it was like an air raid, this shape, but they had a very long main building with a stage at one end where they could perform, show films and perform plays and the rest of it. But they also had a medical room, 2 medical rooms with nurses to again the beginnings of NHS type, caring for the staff in a way that had never happened before, and this was. Mrs. Appleton pushed it, and the photograph you see in there of her on the opening, she's got a bunch of flowers, which were well deserved for that effort, really.
And also, it's interesting the part you sent to me about Herbert Reed and the art and industry, which I loved, on the doors as we came in.
Yes.
And how actually, I mean, you should talk a little bit about Herbert Reed and the other guy.
Frank Pick.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what they were doing.
Well,
how,
yeah, I mean,
how actually
this is another fascinating.
Completely unaware.
Yeah, absolutely.
Completely unaware.
Yeah,
again.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a fascinating story in a way because there was an unknown interwar English avant-garde, unknown, because it was the London Underground, the posters, the stations, the tube map, etc. Frank Pick was the man for London Underground, and he had the ambition of the People's Art Gallery, and he created that in a way, and he was the largest commissioner of modern art in the interwar period. He began in 1915 when the problem was recognised that British design had fallen behind the Germans in military and all kinds of engineering in general. And so the ambition that he and his pal Herbert Reed, I always forget his first name for some reason, want to call him something else, who was the leading art critic between the wars, was they wanted to bring together art and industry. Now, at that time, memory really related to William Morris hating the factory and saying art could never be produced in the factory. And these two knew the factory was the future. You know, there was no choice about it. So was it possible that art could be produced? So 1934, Reed wrote a book called Art and Industry, which became the Bible of all industrial designers. And his ambition was that a leading aesthetic could be created to suit modern materials in the factory. James Leonard did it. Reed never managed to get up the road from London to Stevenage to see. Never bothered to go into factories to meet industrial designers. Such a British story. So Leonard quietly, on his own, well, with Johnny Appleton, achieved the dream of Herbert Reed that Herbert Reed never knew about.
So the English were unaware, but actually the designs were recognised and celebrated overseas.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the catalogue came out in March 1948, and in April 1948, the leading design magazine in the world, called Domus, edited by Gio Ponti, Italian architect and designer, had a 2-page spread saying in Italian, you know, you Italians, look what can be done.
And then later the designs were licensed by Knoll.
Yeah, the next year,
America.
Knoll, which was the leading importer of modernist design, so Mies van der Rohe, Corbusier, etc. But a small market.
Yeah. What date was it? What year when Appleton was sacked?
Well, he was. Trouble began in the beginning of 1949, and they kept him on, but he was officially to be dismissed from the board in January 1950.
Okay.
Now, the reason was that for some set of reasons, he'd been in charge of the factory furniture department since 1932, and the Appleton Special dated from 1932, and the leading motor racing commentator of the interwar period said of the Appleton Special that it was made without regard to cost. And then ESA discovered there's quite a lot of money missing. And I don't know, but it seems to me a fairly shrewd suggestion that Appleton put it into the racing car. Not for himself, in a way, you know, but for the racing car.
Yeah.
So so he'd lost the confidence of the board, who were a bunch of staid individuals of the kind that saw the ruin of Britain after the Second World War by their incompetent management. So that's the story.
And we talked a little bit about the kind of London avant-garde, the sort of art, architecture scene that was going on.
Yeah.
And clearly none of them came up the road to Stevenage. But
it's a long way.
But James Leonard.
Yes, he did that. James Leonard had 3 lives. He had a life in the factory, the 9 to 5. He had his life at home. He was a family man with 4 children, devoted to his children who adored him, devoted to his grandchildren. In fact, I don't think it's on the wall at the moment, but he did a lovely little booklet for his first granddaughter. Ironically, it was called The Two Giants. He could have been talking about himself and Appleton, but it was a children's book, and it's lovely, and it may appear on the wall, depending on Jo. She's very difficult about this kind of thing. And maybe in the period of the exhibition it will appear. But I forgot what I was going to say now. What was I going to say?
Well,
he had a third life.
Oh yes, exactly. Thank you very much. Thank you for my agent over there. He did have a third life, which his family knew about. His daughter told me about it. Secret life. He went to London as often as he possibly could. In 1947, he was elected a Fellow of the Society of Industrial Artists, partly because of the excellence of the designs, but partly because in the search to find industrial designers, there was only one really working in a mass production factory. Guess who? So there were a bunch of people who were kind of arty-farty types, but nobody working in mass production. And I mean, Leonard suffered in mass production. I mean, in 50 years, he got one chance, this chance, from 1944 till 1950 when Project X was declared closed.
Around the time when Appleton was...
Yes, exactly. So he'd lost his protector, and he lost the only person with imagination, intelligence and courage in ESA.
Neither of them could have done it without each other.
No, they couldn't. No, absolutely right. I mean, James Leonard's designs are brilliant, but it wouldn't have had a chance of existing if Appleton had not pushed the boat out in the amazing way that he did. And importing that machinery when nobody could import stuff after the war, Britain was bust, and it was very looked down upon. You know, you have to export, that was a word. And there's a lovely story about his funeral. He retired in 1969 after 50 years of the factory. And he died, very sadly, only 4 years later in his beloved Rose Garden. And there was, and again his daughter told me this, at the funeral, a glamorous, mysterious woman from London. And the daughter told me the name, and fortunately it wasn't Smith. It was a very, very unusual name. And I managed to start researching it, and I found this photograph of Dead of the Year on Country Life with the same name before she got married. I thought, well, she's a bit young. She was only 18 at this time. But the mother was about the same age as me. And the mother had a very interesting past. She was an actress. And in 1929, she was the voice of the first British sound film directed by Alfred Hitchcock. 3 years later, well, the reason she was the voice, by the way, was that Hitchcock's star was Czech and couldn't speak English. 3 years later, the same actress we're talking about starred as the main star in another Hitchcock sound film, probably enough, called Rich and Strange. And there is a picture of her in the... Such a lovely place, such a lovely place. I can't prove, I don't know, that it was her that came to a funeral. But I couldn't find another one who was an obvious target. I mean, it may well be another one. And she became, her daughter became a duchess. And so they were living high on the hog, as it were. I mean, the husband was only an oldie Tony, he was a Jew. But they were a pretty high-flying family. But I just like the idea of this mysterious... What's ironic about it is that, in a way, she was the sole representative of that life in London, where he had the artistic, intellectual interests and people that he knew, cultural opportunities, and the crowd that he mixed with. He must have meant a lot for her to come up. And my imaginative, romantic idea is that perhaps she alone knew how his heart was broken by this chair not ever being made. How do you like that story? Are you in tears now? Would people like to ask any questions? Of Peter.
I'm just intrigued by the prototype chair, and I hope your heart's not going to be broken in your quest to build it. But just looking, do you think it actually was rationalised for production? And looking at the one on the left, the design language is quite different. There's a lot of different planes.
Glad you asked that question.
Could it actually be built in two parts, that side? I mean, that would suggest it was just tacked together.
That whole thing, the whole side is one casting, so it went further, as it were.
But with their cast, as a prototype, could they have afforded to the machining?
Yes, this is where all the dies that cost the money.
Yeah.
See, what was amazing about James Leonard's imagination was when you think of a die, you think of engineering pieces that are made. It's a very square and he came up with these. I mean, look at the shape of that thing. To put that into a die. When you go through to the exhibition, on the stage at the end, on the right, there's his teacher's desk. Look at the frame of that teacher's desk. It's a one-piece casting. Imagine the size of the die and the investment. Investment to do it. And as I said earlier, the only reason they could imagine doing it was the volume in the schools that they would be not guaranteed, but they had a good chance of being able to sell. Whereas in Harrods, they were so affordable. It's a very good question, and it goes to the heart of, in a way, the problem James Leonard had working in this factory. Eames, the chair became Cherry Century, described the LCW as a 30-year dream. And the last 5 years of that dream were successive generations of adjustments made to it before it entered mass production. Where they had one go, and then the door shut.